Well, welcome all. We are thrilled to have you here for our conversation on designing a portfolio lifestyle of purpose and wellness. It is a conversation with founder and CEO of Impact C3, Holly Copeland. And I'm going to take down my screen in a moment here because I want to showcase our wonderful guest. There we go. Hello, Holly.
Hello, Seth.
We are thrilled to have you here. Holly, as I mentioned, is the founder and CEO of Impact C3, a boutique consulting firm whose differentiated value is in their experience and ability to understand the complexities that underpin entrenched societal problems and to creatively deploy capital to amplify the impact of clients. She has a storied background. She was a leader at Horizon Therapeutics, global philanthropy and CSR efforts, earning accolades like People Magazine's Top 50 Companies That Care and an Emmy for a short form video. She has also launched award-winning programs, co-founded the 3.8 Project, and published a children's book with her daughters. She serves on the boards of Chicago Innovation, Shopping Gives, and Matter, and she's held leadership roles across both the private sector and government, including managing a large portfolio to support small businesses and innovation. Welcome, Holly. And we are going to talk with you today about an area that you have really developed on your own initiative as part of your own midlife, and that is around how you have developed this portfolio of wellness. And I'll just say that the way we came to this conversation is that I had the joy of having lunch with you, and the ostensible purpose was to talk about your new consulting firm. But as we jumped into our conversation, what we ended up talking a lot about was how that was part of this portfolio life. And as I learned so much from you about how you redesigned your life in this middle adolescence, as it's sometimes called, I thought it would be really valuable to share with our audience. And so I want to bring them through your journey as a way to kind of showcase what's possible. And also, I know you're still in the learning process, so it'll be a great opportunity for you to also hear their questions and ideas as you go about this midlife transition. So can we start with taking us back to the moment where you decided you wanted to make a change? You've had decades of leadership in government and business, and you get to a place where you're saying you want to redesign your life. What was it that kind of sparked that for you? And was it gradual or was it a kind of sudden realization?
Thank you for that question, Seth. And thanks for having me join today. I'm really happy to be here and to share a bit about my journey with those of you who have joined us. To answer your question, I think it was a kind of both. So there was a confluence of variables that had presented themselves over the period of a couple of decades that really coalesced around a major life event that I think created this space where an adjustment could be made. So to provide some color around that, my personal background started from, as a senior in high school, I ended up pregnant with my oldest daughter, and I felt like the charge in front of me was, I really wanted to create an opportunity for her and eventually my other daughter to really feel like they had access to any opportunity and that they would have the world at their feet. And so when you come from a humble background like I did, there's really two pathways where you can kind of pursue that kind of a life goal. One is through education, the other really through entrepreneurship. And so I really dove into the educational piece and started a schedule where I, was pouring myself into all of the things, the labels that kind of attach to you, mother, caretaker, high performer, going to school full-time, working full-time, managing the house. And that relentless pace is something that I kept up with. So whereas I feel like we all have the ability to kind of push through a very difficult, challenging time in our life and just kind of put our heads down and get through, as long as there's like a horizon that we can get to and then maybe readjust. And now reflecting, I never readjusted. I just ended up in careers where I continued to pour all of myself into them and not relenting. And eventually, when I mentioned those variables that sort of built up pressure, I think, you kind of convince yourself when you're in those moments that you have a system in place where you're managing and juggling all the balls. But eventually the universe, whatever you believe in, your body, decides to give you a different message and tell you otherwise. And so these pressures built up with really this culminating event or crossroads for me personally, which was my both of my daughters and myself all ended up facing some pretty serious health challenges within this 30-day window. My youngest, who had developed, a life-threatening health issue where, we were confronting the reality that she might not be with us every single day over a period of 6 years, was incredibly heavy. And we were managing that. She was hospitalized. And then as soon as she came out, my older daughter had a healthcare issue. She was hospitalized. And then I had developed an autoimmune disease, cause unrelated, but certainly inflamed with stress. And I was also hospitalized. And so for me, it was sort of recognizing in this moment, like I felt like I had been kind of swimming against this tide of resisting these different signs that maybe there would be a call to action to switch up how I was approaching things. And, again, the universe, my body, what have you, sort of like forced my hand and really created this perfect storm of, now I look back an opportunity to really reflect and see if an adjustment was needed. And I took that leap. I made a pretty significant adjustment, actually. And looking back, it was a really great decision.
Well, and so there are a number of really unique aspects to your story, but I do think there are some very real themes that everyone feels, right? You get to a point in your life, you decide you want to achieve something, and then you go after it with vigor. In your case, you are wildly successful in that first mountain. You're able to accomplish at the greatest levels from, the perspective of leadership and impact, and you're able to provide for your family and really enable your daughters to have opportunities. And then you come to a crossroads. There are surprises that come along the way. You're dealing with health and you're thinking to yourself, is this now where I want to be? And it sounds like there was both a gradual buildup and then a sudden event that kind of spark this point where you decide, okay, I do want to actually take this thing that's been building in my mind and I want to redesign. So let's talk about that movement toward a portfolio lifestyle of purpose and wellness. And, when we met, one thing I was struck by in our conversation was you talked about one of the first pieces was decoupling your identity from paid work, which I thought was such an interesting way to frame one of the immediate barriers and challenges to this next stage of your life. And so, can you talk a little bit about what that means and why you thought it was important before you could enter this next chapter?
Sure. So it seems that when we're approaching a moment in time where we could make an adjustment, that we come to that moment carrying, I guess, a backpack of all of the things that we've identified with all of our labels, our assumptions about what we can expect out of our lives, what we need in our lives. And for me, in approaching this, I wanted to be really mindful about removing those labels, removing those identifiers, and really turning towards a blank canvas of what the possibilities could be. So, over the course of decades, we all are in careers, oftentimes within the same industry, and we develop these skills and these expertise. And then we approach this moment where we might want to pivot into something that's more purposeful or impactful. But we take that experience with us in that intellectual journey as we're considering what could be next. And that might influence the outcome, which may or may not be a good thing. But my perspective was that I wanted to independently evaluate what could be next without that influencing it. Because if I'm a chief financial officer it might be great to lend that expertise to a nonprofit or in some sort of endeavor that's purposeful in this next chapter, but that might also not be the best use of your time in a way that leads to your own inner peace or your own joy, whatever that North Star is for you, that you really want to be the foundational principle of what drives this next chapter. And so we really have to be mindful about removing that potential bias or influence from the process of discovering what could be next.
Well, there's a great model that our business professor at Booth, Harry Davis, talks about in LSI, which is that you want to travel lightly. And so you build up all this baggage, but just like when you're going on a vacation, if you bring everything you have with you, that's going to weigh you down. At the same time, you don't necessarily want to go naked and without any of your wardrobe or like so you really have to be thoughtful about, okay, I'm going to a new place, I'm on a new chapter. What of all of these things that I built up is valuable that I want to take forward? And how do I let go of all of these incredible, wardrobe pieces that I may have loved, but that aren't going to suit me well on the beach or on, the mountain climb? And I think it's just a great metaphor for how to think about this stage in many ways.
You
Um,
know, that reminds me actually, if I could, there's this really great book that I would recommend for those that haven't read, Rick Rubin, The Creative Act. And he really talks about, from an artist's perspective, which we can all be artists in our life, right? We don't necessarily have to paint. But the first phase in is discovery in any creative endeavor. And I think I really applied a lot of that those ideas into the journey of life that I was embarking upon, because you really want in the discovery phase, you don't want to bring any baggage, right? Because then you're limiting the potential opportunities, the potential output. So it's really coming in as light as you possibly can.
well, so you have now built this portfolio life, and you're, a year or so into it after a lot of discernment. So, what have you ultimately created in that life? Can you tell us what it looks like and how you decided what to include in your portfolio?
Sure. So it's been a really interesting process. Everyone kind of comes to a situation with their own life experiences and realities in their life, and they may or may not be able to do certain things that others can. But in my experience, I was really fortunate that at the beginning of this journey, so like part of my pivot was we decided I bought a farm and we got closer to family. I had like my village stepped in to kind of help stabilize situations with my daughter's health, which was great because it allowed me to really kind of dive in to this process. And at the same time, call it luck, the universe, a dear friend of mine from 20 years back, I was able to reconnect with. And, he had suggested that as part of this process to sort of initiate it, it might be helpful to really remove myself from the day-to-day expectations that I had for myself, that others had for me, and to really put myself in a new geographic location that was foreign in the sense, not necessarily foreign country, which it was in this case, but really just a different experience. It allows you to be with yourself in a way that's unfamiliar, and you can learn more about yourself. So he had family land, family home, nestled in the Andes Mountains in Bolivia. This idyllic, beautiful country with beautiful people, and I really immersed myself there. So I spent over the course of 2 years. I went 4 different times, up to 30 days on each experience, and I think what that allowed me to do is really jumpstart this process, because I got to experience a way of living and a way of viewing myself in a new context, in a new environment, that was conducive with this process of reevaluating, like, who am I as a human, as a woman, without all of these labels and expectations and the professional background? Who am I in this blank space? And geographically relocating allowed me the freedom to be able to do that. So in the course of that process, I read voraciously. I asked everyone that I knew and loved and respected for book recommendations. And it was like the full gamut of what you can imagine topics being, but I absorbed everything. I took notes. I was intentional about really being alone with myself and my thoughts, like really paying attention to how I felt when I engaged in certain activities or when I would engage with certain individuals, and noticing it in a way that I think I hadn't before. Like as I'm sort of funneling down the activities that would ultimately kind of go through the funnel and be part of this portfolio life. So some example, like hiking. I started doing woodworking. I thought I wanted to own an empanada food truck. Not so much. After I made empanadas for a couple of hours, I was like, this is a little too much for me. But really being open about all of the inputs and exploring and staying in tune with myself. So ultimately, like through this whole process, where I landed is my portfolio has four main components. The first is family and community. So I'm fortunate. I actually really love my family. I enjoy being around them. My daughters are phenomenal young women, and so it was important to me. It filled up my cup to make sure that I was allotting a specific amount of time on a weekly basis to engage with them wholly, not kind of being distracted by other things. In addition to that, community has always been something really important to me. I think just given my own journey and background, when I am giving back, when I'm volunteering, it's something that feeds my soul. And I recognize that doing that on a regular basis is something that I needed to do. So that's one element, family and community. The second for me was creative endeavors. And, this was interesting because I do have some perfectionist tendencies that I have to address at times. But what I found was that like the act of creating anything is something that I deeply enjoy, like having an idea, doing research, learning about it, trying it, failing, and then creating something that's not perfect, but it's something that I created. That process is like intoxicating to me. And I really wanted to carve out time to be able to do that. So from the woodworking or gardening, I make my own bread, my own kombucha. Like I've just really delved into this act of creation and manifesting it in all kinds of different ways. The third area of my portfolio is paid work. And this is me realizing like the great privileged position that I had, which is that my career actually intersected with my, core foundational passions. So this last role that I had with Horizon Therapeutics, I got to build and grow our global philanthropic footprint, and really viewed my work as being like a bridge builder between individuals with kind hearts and resources and connecting them with communities and people who needed those resources. And so I recognized that being able to continue to pour myself professionally into projects and people I believe in was something that I wanted to make sure I continued to do. And then the final element of my portfolio, and I think Seth, you and I spent a lot of time talking about this, was the wellness piece. And really making sure that I had time for it. Again, in reflection, when we were dealing with all of the situations about my daughter's health and my health, it was like I was already reading all of the guidance and advice around like what we need to do to maintain ourselves in a stressful period, right? You need to do yoga, you need to do meditation and all these things. And so they were on my to-do list. And what I realized is because my life wasn't balanced in a way that was conducive with how I wanted to be living, it became a stressful event. Like if my daughter had a health situation and it interfered with my yoga practice, I would get stressed out because I wasn't doing what I needed to do to maintain my health, right? So now I am intentional about making sure I have the space in my life where I can devote myself to these practices in a way that actually doesn't compound other stresses, but actually serves its purpose, which is to be a calming, centering practice.
And just in terms of order of magnitude, Holly, how different is this than the pre-portfolio lifestyle stage? I mean, how many hours were you working at Horizon? How many now in paid work? Like, just give us a little bit of a picture of the change, because all four of those aspects would have had probably some role in the portfolio before, but my strong sense is that they had very different allocations.
That is exactly right. And I think that's part of the process, right? It's sort of that rebalancing of your portfolio. So before, I mean, my goodness, 90% with work. It's what it felt like, right? The travel schedule, the weight, always being on, never being off. It felt like a majority of myself was poured into that. And then, my daughter's the other 10%, right, of the time and energy not spent in the workday, leaving very little for anything else, and certainly no space for myself. Right. And I think that's probably where we find a lot of ourselves kind of in our portfolio as we approach this moment where we might want to make a change. Now, what I've done is, without being, overly dogmatic about the application of my time allocations, I have my North Star. I have, 1.5 days I want to devote to this every week. 2 days I want to devote to this every week. And I use block scheduling. So I like block out the time on my calendar, and I'm intentional about how my weeks are structured in a way that allows me to ladder up to these larger goals. Because otherwise, I felt, at least for me, I tend to allow myself to give to external factors versus really relying on like what I'm now recognize that I need for myself. And so I need to protect that. And I try to through the use of my calendar mainly.
So I have one more question, then we want to open it up to audience questions. Tell us about your surprises and aha moments so far. And in particular, has this changed your perception of what thriving or success looks like? I mean, my guess is that, come back to that senior in high school, you have this event, you say, okay, here's what success looks like. It's providing for this daughter that's coming. Here's where I'm going to be able to achieve that. That's one vision. My guess is there's another conception now. Just talk about the surprises and how you've evolved in your thinking about thriving or success or the mountain that you're climbing.
Sure. So yes. I think, well, I know my younger self would have absolutely defined up until pretty recently success by external factors, external variables, right? Like making sure that, I'm doing work that offers respect from peers and colleagues and lots of opportunities, and being able to provide financially in a way that it delivers a certain kind of lifestyle for myself and my children, and everything external. And I think now another author shout out I'll give, after spending a lot of time with Bell Hooks, who is one of my favorite authors, and specifically her book called All About Love. It really kind of helped me shift this paradigm in the way that I think about success, and that it's really, at the end of the day, only can be measured by your internal variables, right? Like, do you feel successful in the sense that you're living your life the way that is meaningful, and in X number of years when you look back, do you feel that the way that you were allocating your time was reflective of the ways that you wanted to be living your life? I think that, like, coming into balance is such an important part of the process of defining success. Um, and then to your other question, surprises. Uh, yes. So I think that maybe the biggest surprise in this whole transition for me has been, I mentioned I bought this farm during COVID, and I really thought that like the way that it was going to land is I would be spending a majority of my time in Chicago, and then using the farm as, a long weekend escape or, extended holidays. What I did not expect is that I would end up spending 90% plus of my time at the farm. And it still honestly surprises me, but there's something about being so close to nature and the process that happens. And this like vibrant ecosystem that I'm a part of, like the birds singing me good morning songs, and, the insects kind of coming in their waves, and the transition of the sunrises along the horizon, depending on where we are in the calendar year. I mean, they're just all these beautiful things that existed that I hadn't really paid attention to. And now that I am, the value in being able to be a part of that has outweighed other areas of my life that I thought I would be living. So I remain open to kind of how things evolve, and just really excited that I've had this opportunity to make this adjustment.
So we have an interesting question from Mary. What would you want younger folks to know who are at a stage where you were about this journey? I mean, because my guess is that when you look back, you're incredibly proud of what you accomplished. A lot of what you threw yourself into was necessary to move your daughters to where they needed to be and to maybe achieve the level of thriving that even allowed you to encounter the possibility of a second chapter. And so it's always this interesting question because you're in the right place for you now. But I guess the question at the, foundation of Mary's is, would this change anything about, Holly 1.0 or whatever that number would be in that chapter of life? Like, is there any advice you'd give to the younger Holly or to other young, adults?
This has come up quite a bit in conversations that I've had with people about this transition. And with one individual, we talked about this parable about, the fisherman in the Amazon who spends his days, looking at this beautiful view and fishing. And, a capitalist comes down and is like, oh my gosh, you have this huge supply of fish. Like I could help you set up an export business and you could do this and this and this. And, in short and summary, the fisherman says, well, why would I want to do that? And the capitalist says, well, then you can like rest and enjoy your days. And the fisherman says, that's what I'm doing now. Like, why do I need to go through that whole process? Right. And so I feel like the application of that concept or metaphor is interesting here, right? Because ideally you go back to your younger self and say, you don't need to toil and throw yourself into these endeavors where you're pushing yourself emotionally and physically to these extremes, only to end up back in this place where you kind of dial it down and you go back to this minimalist approach. And can you just be there to begin with and carry that through your whole lifetime without having, to go through difficult moments to get back? I don't know. I mean, ideally, you'd want to be able to have that conversation with yourself and say, maybe like, let's do a reassessment of what you really find valuable. But I also feel like that changes over time. So, saying to a younger person, like in my case, I was on food stamps, I was on public assistance. Like for me, it was like heads down. I need to throw myself into these occupations so I can create a better existence for my kids. If someone had come to me and said, why don't you reflect on, your future self and how you'd really like to be spending your days? It's almost like it's a nonsensical proposition. So I do think you have to be in the right headspace and have access to the right opportunities and privilege to maybe consider some of these things that we're talking about today.
We have a question here from Shiloh about how you structured your time in this moment where you were going through the reset. You described, for example, going to Bolivia. And I know for me, as I hear that story, it's intimidating in the sense that, at that stage of life where maybe I don't have the same responsibilities with my kids or other pieces, I worry like, what am I going to do with my time? Like, it feels, I know to some that would sound like exciting. I'll acknowledge I'm in the camp where it'd be like, oh my God, how am I going to fill my day? Like, my favorite days are the days that don't stop. And it's just like constant learning and action. So how did you structure it? Was it structured? Was it unstructured? Tell us about that. And I mean, my sense, Holly, from knowing you is that you pack a lot in and enjoy activity, even if maybe, it got to a point of being too much. So how did you approach that as someone who was coming out of a calendar that never ended and now headed into, this open calendar potentially in Bolivia?
Mhm. So the calendar was still full, just with different things, right? So there was this process of slowing down my internal and external environments without a doubt as part of that physical relocation to Bolivia during those periods. And when I was there was moments for contemplation, but that typically follows an engagement in different kinds of activities, right? So there would be day-long hikes, or we would go waterfall hunting or yoga in the mountains, reading books, engaging in a practice, learning, right? So all of those activities are still happening. It's not that you're just sitting kind of idle and twiddling your thumbs. I think it's removing yourself from your day-to-day experience and your day-to-day norms and loading in new activities, new perspectives, things that are going to kind of broaden the aperture and like your view and vantage point of life and your experience. And then through that process, you can kind of narrow things back down. So I would say it's still full. You're just filling it with perhaps different things than you filled your time and your schedule with before.
So we are coming to time, but I want to fit in a few questions at once for a final response, Holly. Where does spiritual fit in to your journey? Is it in that wellness bucket? If so, how? Where do friendships and connections fit in? Especially, I'm guessing the farm may not be connected to some of the friendships that you've built, at least in your adulthood when you've been around Chicago. And then how you set up for this stage, financially, professionally. If you can take on as much of that as possible in a couple minutes, with apologies that we probably planned this with too little time in it, given your incredible and extraordinary insight.
Very kind. Maybe I'll start with the last one. So I think I did a lot of research, of course, and embrace this idea of minimalism. So I don't have, like my farmhouse is comfortable and I have all the things that, I feel like make my life meaningful and comfortable in a way that like I wanted. However, as part of the process, I donated and got rid of a lot of stuff. Like over the years, you accumulate and you accumulate. And I feel like there's this, sometimes an invisible weight that you carry with all of this stuff. And so I really pared things down to the essentials. Maria Kondoed my house, right? And it was like, have I used this thing in the last 6 months of my life? If not, like it's not really serving a purpose and it's occupying space and requires my energy in some capacity. So applying that logic through all facets of my life, I think allowed me to get to a place physically that feels lighter.
Yeah.
I think spiritually, I've kind of dabbled with different areas. So I really appreciate a lot of the philosophy around Buddhism. My meditation always starts with a Dharma talk. And, I feel like for me personally, the way that some of the approaches are around dealing with the stresses of life, like I buy into this idea now, based on what I've learned that, if we can reach this equilibrium or this balance within ourselves and our inner world, and things happen in our external environment, and we can still kind of maintain that balance, right? Really focusing on what we can control versus what we can't control. That has been huge for me. So I think leaned into that, not necessarily on the dogmatic religious side, but embracing some of those philosophical ideas into my day-to-day experience. And then I'm sorry, what was the other one?
Uh, Let me look back, but I know we are at time. So I think the final area was just around friendships and how you're thinking about those at this stage and the wellness piece.
Yes. In short, I've made a decision that I am only going to create space in my new portfolio lifestyle for love. And it might sound a little like naive, but essentially relationships that fill me up and that I want to pour into, and giving less of my time and energy to other relationships that don't fill that purpose.
Well, I have to say, Holly, you are both a guide and a role model. I think all of us aspire to these values, and it's hard for all the reasons you named in terms of the urgency of now and the external expectations. And I think one of the really powerful things that you do is you give us all a little bit of an external peer pressure to be better. And one of the things when you look at the world is that capitalism, and I'm a pro-capitalism person, I know you are, but it tends toward valuing certain things that obviously are generative from a financial standpoint, right? That's obviously its entire reason for existence is to flow resources, but those are not necessarily what matter to you, but they become these external burdens around you, right? Among many other forces. And so I think one of the most powerful things that we can do in a university context is to really deeply explore ideas. What matters? How do you define it? Why? And in the process, unpack some of those false assumptions and create space for people to find what they see as their true selves. So, thank you for being such an extraordinary role model. I know you're still on this journey, so perhaps we can come back to you and have a further conversation about what you're learning along the way. For now, though, you filled our souls, to use your wording, and it's been wonderful to hear how you've embraced a chapter of love and wellness and purpose. And we look forward to continuing the conversation. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Seth. It's a pleasure.
Bye. Thank you.